Welcome to the Resourcing Conference. It's my pleasure to welcome you here in Vienna for this big conference. My name is Ursula Kopp. I'm part of the Institute for Managing Sustainability here, and apart from doing research in CSR and innovation and evaluation on sustainable development, I quite often moderate multi-stakeholder dialogues, and therefore I'm the facilitator for you today, and I will lead you through the program. André, may I ask you, as the head of the Institute for Managing Sustainability and as the consortium leader of this resourcing project, to take us a bit further into the resourcing project itself?
With pleasure. First of all, thanks for being here. Thanks for being in Vienna, great town. Thanks for being at the campus, great campus. Thanks for being at the resourcing project, great project. We had the pleasure of 3 years of coordinating this project together with a lot of partners, who it was a real pleasure to work with. Partners from industry, as you see here, for example, consultancies, partners from science, partners who are networking organizations, but also partners from civil society. And I think that's very outstanding that in such a project, you have all these different stakeholders represented in a consortium. And it was a pleasure to collaborate with you. For the next 2 days, perhaps you might be interested to get to know these people. So this is why I would like all the partners of this project now to briefly stand up. So if you're one of the partners, please stand up that the others might see you. And if you do not stand up right now, look at these people, they're great. And you might want to catch them during the break and ask them very detailed questions, and then they will regret that they stood up now, I'm sure. So what was the situation a few years ago when we started? There were global supply chain challenges, and many of them still remain. There is a certain complexity. Global supply chains are incredibly complex. Even the word supply chain suggests that's a chain. This is not a chain. These are dynamic systems. These are webs. They are interconnected. And many, many companies just know their business-to-business provider. They do not have any knowledge about the whole system. And we suffer from systemic problems. We suffer from systemic problems when car manufacturers in the Ukraine cannot deliver their products anymore, and car manufacturers in Germany have to stop their production. We are interconnected on a global scale. But we lack the knowledge how and which resources flow through the system. There are knowledge asymmetries, so some know more, some know less, especially the small and medium-sized enterprises are completely overwhelmed with finding out which is their position, how can they take responsibility. We know that there is not a global playing field at the moment, so it's basically cheaper to produce at low environmental standards and low social standards. It's simply cheaper. Not just in mineral supply chains, just think about your shirts and your dresses. If they are manufactured in Bangladesh, for sure, they're much cheaper if they are manufactured in Austria. And not a little bit cheaper, a lot cheaper. And this is perhaps because there are so low environmental standards and so low societal standards there. So how can companies who consider responsibility compete with other companies who make a profit out of privatizing profits and socializing losses? So that's the level playing field we have to strive for. We have a lack of vertical and horizontal collaboration. We need institutions that support companies to collaborate along supply chains, and we have, that's also quite a fragmentation of initiatives. And I don't want to go into all of these details. There are so many different initiatives about research, about standards, about mandatory regulation on policy level, on industry level, on civil society. And it's for many companies quite demanding to know which standard to apply in which supply chain and how to report according to which standard. And I think that the Commission taken a lot of steps into harmonizing, into making it more visible, making it more transparent, also in further developing these standards. So what we've done in the resourcing project, we built a global stakeholder platform. That's also the slogan of the project, a global stakeholder platform for responsible sourcing in mineral value chains. And we focused on 3 focus areas, which are really key for the future of Europe and even for the world. It's about renewable energy. We know we have to shift from burning carbon to any kind of renewable energy. Wind, solar, wherever it comes from. Hopefully not nuclear power. Don't perceive nuclear power as renewable. And if you just want to have a walk and you walk over there to OMV, tell them their business model is outdated. Perhaps they will listen to you. They do not listen to the ones who glue themselves on the streets. At the moment, you just cross the street while the people glue themselves there and say this is not a future-proof business model, but we know we need to decarbonize our energy system. That's a fact. And if we decarbonize our energy system, we need certain kind of resources for the batteries, for the photovoltaic panels, and these resources are critical raw materials and they are scarce and we have problems in the supply chains. This is why we took renewable energy as one of the areas. E-mobility or sustainable mobility is the second key area. If we want to go for renewables, we have to go also to decarbonize our mobility. And electronics we need for all of that. So the demand for electronic goods, for electronic components, for microchips will dramatically rise because of growth of the economy, but also because of decarbonization and of making everything smarter and more digital. These were the three topical areas. What have we done in the 3 years? No, I don't want to tell you. It's so much. If I start talking about this, we'll be here just for 2 days. Just what is interesting is what you can get out of it. 50 reports, policy briefs, documents, 60 videos, webinars, and interviews. Roadmaps was already mentioned before. 3 roadmaps for these 3 areas. Roadmaps which show which targets and milestones need to be achieved and a scale from today to 2030 to 2040 to 2050 for these 3 different sectors. We have good practice cases, good practice guidelines, in total 11 good practice cases, and we have a common vision of responsible sourcing. Now you might say common vision always is something, yeah, vision. The problem is that when you don't have the same understanding of what responsible sourcing means, you talk about a term and you don't know what you're talking about. And I think the project achieved a shared understanding of civil society, industry, and research on what is meant by responsible sourcing. If you want to know more about it, you can take a picture, you can link to our website, you follow us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and so on. And you stay here till tomorrow, because here are the partners, and they will tell you more about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, André. May I now ask Maria Nyberg to complete our opening? She's from the Directorate General for Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs, in short, DG GROW, and they're from the Department Energy Intensive Industries, Raw Materials and Hydrogen. Thank you that you made your way to Vienna today, and you will tell us your point of view on the topic.
Good morning to you all. Very happy to be here. So I come from the raw materials unit in DG GROW at the European Commission, and we are the ones who have come forward with the Critical Raw Materials Act in March of this year, which I will be very happy to tell you more about and how it is relevant in the context of responsible sourcing and sustainable mining and the resourcing project. But I would like to start off with saying that we follow closely and we listen to the research that you have carried out in the resourcing project, and that is why we wanted to be here, because it has an impact on the policy development, the research findings and results that you have come up with. So that is really the main reason why I'm here today. I would like to present a little bit raw materials policy in a broader sense, going more in detail into to the Critical Raw Materials Act. So just to say, I concur with the previous speakers on that the topic of your conference and of your project, it couldn't be more at the top of the European policy agenda as we move towards the end of this mandate. For any of you who listened to our President Ursula von der Leyen in her State of the Union address of last week, it is clear that there were numerous references to EU raw materials policy and to the Critical Raw Materials Act and how we see that it can bring us forward as concerns our resilience and carrying out the twin digital and green transition. The CRM Act is unique in the sense that it's the first time that we propose to set in EU law provisions to improve the functioning of the internal market by setting a framework to ensure the Union's access to secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials. Basically, we want to improve the competitiveness of European industry by strengthening the critical raw materials value chains. We will be identifying strategic projects that are sustainable, that contribute to our strategic raw materials benchmarks, and that create value for the countries that are involved in the partnerships. I'll get back to that later on. So we proposed this regulatory initiative in March, and negotiations with the two co-legislators have kicked off at high speed. We had the first so-called trilogue together with Parliament and Council last night, and we count on adoption of the Critical Raw Materials Act before the elections for the European Parliament in June next year. We have an EU policy for raw materials in place since the communication on the Raw Materials Initiative in 2008 already, tackling the issue of access to sustainable raw materials in the EU. And this means action on three fronts: increase sustainable mining, more responsible sourcing from a diversity of resource-rich third countries, and to boost circularity. And this goes for all materials, including base metals, well, non-energy, non-agricultural raw materials, but it is even more necessary for the critical raw materials. So, we are strengthening the waste and circularity framework. The circular economy package came some 8 years ago, and here the aim is to promote material efficient reuse and recycling of raw materials, and to strengthen the secondary market of raw materials and tap into the potential of raw materials already existing in the economy. The batteries regulation that entered into force last month is a very important initiative in this area, with its provisions for high recycler efficiencies and mandatory recycled content of battery raw materials. It also has, of course, the elements that relate to sustainable supply chains and the mandatory due diligence, which I will come to later on. So, but even if the share of recycled raw materials, and I don't need to remind this audience about this, so even if the share of recycled raw materials that go back into the production processes increases exponentially, because of our high demand of raw materials that the green and digital transition generates, we will still be needing primary raw materials, extract and processed sustainably with full respect of the legal framework in place. And we have significant mineral resources in Europe, including know-how and competitive extraction and processing technologies. So we could produce much more of the clean technology materials that we need. European raw materials production is sustainable because it builds on the highest environmental and social standards, supporting decent work for the workforce and upholding sound governance. We have a robust legislative framework in place to ensure that extraction and processing complies with environmentally and socially sound conditions. For example, the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive, the Water Framework Directive, the Extractive Waste Directive. So we have rules in place to support public participation in the EIA directive procedures, and all EU member states have ratified the Aarhus Convention, ensuring the right to information and public participation in environmental matters. More specifically, we came forward some time ago with sector-specific guidance on how sustainable extraction can happen also in Natura 2000 protected areas. And this guidance shows that there is a possibility for coexistence and extraction and nature conservation can be combined. The framework conditions for sustainable raw materials production in the EU and their importance for the green and digital transition is something that we need to continuously relate to in a dialogue with citizens. And this dialogue needs to happen here in Vienna, at local level in the countries, but the EU also has a role to play here. And one of the inputs to this dialogue is a document that we came forward with a couple of years ago. It is the EU Principles for Sustainable Raw Materials. And it's a non-regulatory initiative, and it's a first of its kind of European charter that establishes a common set of principles, best practices in the processing and mining from exploration to post-closure of raw materials in terms of social, environmental, and economic performance. And this is linked with a set of a list of EU legislation that sets requirements for sustainable raw materials and extraction and processing in Europe, aligning with the Sustainable Development Goals. So these EU Principles for Sustainable Raw Materials is the only, currently, common reference for responsible mining in the EU, and it has been used as a baseline for a recent assessment that was done by BGR, the German Federal Institute for Geosciences and Natural Resources, analyzing sustainability standard systems for mineral resources. So this assessment done by BGR outlines international standards on ESG and allows a comparison regarding their scopes and governance of standards, where the EU principle is a baseline. For the raw materials that we source from third countries, the EU is leading the way in making sure that they are produced responsibly and properly address and mitigate potential human rights and environmental risk. So one building block in this context is the conflict minerals or the responsible minerals regulation, which entered into force a couple of years ago to ensure that the two critical raw materials, tungsten and tantalum, plus tin and gold, are sourced responsibly, and that their supply chains don't help to fund armed conflict or other illegal practices. We have set up, Professor, you mentioned that it can be challenging for the SMEs to keep at pace with the various regulatory and requirements that, of course, it is a different situation for a large company than for a small one to keep track of all the compliances that exist for them. We see this also, and this is why we have come forward with a practical tool to support SMEs to comply with due diligence requirements. It is linked to the conflict, to the responsible minerals regulation, but it is not only limited to that, it is also open for other minerals. It is called Due Diligence Ready. So if you Google it, you will find the portal, which exists in a number of EU languages, and we think that this is useful. We also provide targeted advice service to support the SMEs, because supply chain responsible supply chains cannot happen with all on board, including the SMEs. How am I for time? Running short, yeah? No? So I already mentioned the circularity provisions in the batteries regulation. So the batteries regulation, it is really a landmark initiative because it also has a regulatory layer for ensuring the sustainability of economic activity and requiring companies placing batteries on the EU market that they establish and implement a due diligence policy covering not only human rights and social risk but also environmental risk to the supply chain of specific battery materials. Then we have the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, CSDDD, which takes a horizontal dimension, and that will apply 5 minutes left? Okay. Across sectors, requiring companies to establish and implement due diligence policies in relation to potential environmental and human rights impacts. So also the CSDDD addresses both human rights and environmental risk. we have the, for sustainability reporting, we came forward with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. You will know about the sustainable criteria within the European Green Taxonomy. Here we have resumed the work in preparing sustainability criteria for mining in the taxonomy context. Back to the CRM Act. So you already, Professor, you already related to the complexity of of how there have been a number of disruptions to global supply chains as we knew them, and I would say that we live in a state of perma-crisis. The climate situation, the pandemic, the Russian war against Ukraine. This is the geopolitical context that we live in, and this disruption to the global supply chains need to be addressed. This is why we need to do more than the raw materials policy I just tried to portray for you, and that is why we have come forward with the Critical Raw Materials Act. So at the core of the Critical Raw Materials Act, we have benchmarks. They are set out in Article 1. And basically, it is about that by 2030, the extraction capacity from EU sources will amount to 10% of our needs of the most relevant critical raw materials for the transition. And these ones we call the strategic raw materials. Our processing capacity is to amount to at least 40% of our needs, and our recycling capacity to cover 15% of our needs for strategic raw materials by 2030. And also, we want to diversify the supply so that not more than 65% of our consumption of the strategic raw materials should come from a single third country, where you know that today we are currently exposed to huge dependencies of a very limited number of countries, which it does not cater for a robust supply setup. So this slide shows where we are today as regards the benchmark, and you will receive the slides so it can be useful to take a look. So the way it works is that we will identify strategic projects, and the idea is that with the help of these strategic projects, we will considerably improve the supply of strategic raw materials. And these projects, they can happen in the EU and in third countries. And the idea is that they will benefit from more streamlined permitting without watering down the environmental and social regulation in place, and also to have an improved access to financing. And it is a requirement for the strategic projects that they demonstrate their sustainability as regards preventing, minimizing environmental impacts, follow socially responsible and transparent business practices. And we propose that sustainability certification schemes can be recognized for this purpose, and this is set out in Article 29. We set out the criteria for the certification schemes in Annex 4. These are it is a quite short list. We will come forward with further specification regarding the criteria in an implementing act in some time to come. And I want to underline that the underlying requirements of the scheme in the batteries regulation, in the CSDDD, in the conflict minerals regulation, they are different from the requirements in the Critical Raw Materials Act. So it is not, we don't foresee an automatic recognition of a scheme based on these different legislative initiatives, because in the Critical Raw Materials Act, it is not a legal obligation to certify the projects through a recognized scheme. there is also a possibility to demonstrate the sustainability, referring to requirements for compliance with EU legislation and international instruments, and this is set out in Annex 3. Okay, so I consumed my time. I want to say that we will be using, to reach the diversification benchmark, we will deploy a comprehensive, sustainable and fair international strategy and continue to negotiate bilateral strategic raw material partnerships with reliable partners, and to continue developing sustainable trade and investment agreements, and deploy new diplomatic initiatives such as the Critical Raw Materials Club. And as concerns the raw material partnerships, you should know that we already have them in place with a number of countries, with Canada, with Ukraine, with Kazakhstan, with Namibia, and just this summer with Chile and Argentina, and more are to follow. And the main part in these partnerships is that it is not about us grabbing the resources at our level from the countries and shipping it to EU. No, we want to have a partnership that is good for the sourcing country and that is good for us, where the value proposition includes the sourcing countries to move up the value chain, and for us to have a robust access to the sustainable raw materials we need. So this was an overview of the of EU raw materials policy and how it has evolved over time, and it is clear that sustainability is at the very core. I hope that this can be a useful baseline for your discussions today and tomorrow. And I want to finish by mentioning that do keep your eyes open for this event. It is a non-paying event that takes, one of the few, that takes place in Brussels in November, and it will be really about the main part is the Critical Raw Materials Act. Various aspects related to it, and we will have a whole day devoted to sustainability and ESG in the CRM Act. So don't miss out on that. That will be on the 16th of November. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maria. May I ask you to sit down with me for the following panel? We would like to have a panel on understanding the systemic challenge in this field and possible change in responsible sourcing. And there I would like to invite a couple of experts to come to the podium with me and discuss with you. First of all, I would like to invite Masuma Faruqi to come here with us. Welcome to the podium. Choose a seat. I will be sitting here. You are representing Meine Hütte. It's an independent research and consultancy organization based in England, offering legal risk analysis and research services for the global mining industry. And your work involves an analysis of global value chains, industrial, trade and corporate policies in Europe and in Africa, with a special focus on measuring the socio-economic impact of the mining sector and the development of responsible and sustainable mining frameworks. And therefore, you have had an intensive role within this project so far. And I would like to ask you the first question. The resourcing project promotes a very holistic understanding. I think it is turned on already. A very holistic understanding of responsible sourcing across mineral supply chains. And based on the project results and outputs, could you explain the major aspects of responsible sourcing approaches that drive change towards more sustainable raw materials from your point of view?
Absolutely. It's the easiest thing to do is take 4 years of research and put it in 3 sentences. It's a lovely challenge. And whatever I'm saying is a reflection of the research done by all the partners. So this is not my brilliance. This is the brilliance of the team who put this stuff together. So when you guys were putting this presentation together, you guys put the word systemic. And I was like, what the hell is, sorry. What is systemic? Where does that word come from? And systemic change is around saying, do not address the symptoms, find the root cause and address the root cause. And within resourcing, that's how we started. We looked at, in our state of play reports, we looked at what are the symptoms. And the symptoms are quite extensive. They've been in reports, they've been across newspapers, we've heard of blood diamonds, blood tin, red cobalt, but they're not just at the extractive phase. Within the state of play reports, we discovered the amount of challenges within the recycling sector, about occupational health and safety standards when it comes to recycling within Europe. We talked about hazardous conditions when you're transporting batteries. So the symptoms that go around it can be summed into 3 issues. One is governance. How do you set and imply the rules that will govern value chains, particularly since they cross so many jurisdictional boundaries? It's not good enough Europe having these rules. Do African countries have these rules, and do they have the capacity to implement it? So one of the challenges across value chains was around governance. The second issue that we had was around fair value, which is something that Andre was talking about in his speech. Are you giving fair value to the workers right at the bottom, to the disenfranchised? How do you determine what fair value is, and how do you make sure they're getting the fair value for their lands, for loss of biodiversity, for loss of employment, for loss of natural resources, for all the e-waste that gets recycled in Africa? Do you have fair value? And the third thing, which is not new, which is the defense of human rights. And human rights has been an issue. You can trace it back to ILO movements from the 1900s. If you look at ILO conventions, human rights are addressed there. Why are we still talking about it? So those were the symptoms, and the systemic challenges that we looked at was, how do you get policy in place? How do you get regulations that actually work in place and not in just one part of that supply chain, but across the supply chain? What are the power dynamics? How do you ensure that the disenfranchised are listened to? How do you make sure that the people at the bottom of the chain are heard at the top of the chain? Are people at the top of the chain really just really awful bad people? And it turns out most of them are not. Most of them are really nice people. But it is around awareness. Do they know what is going on with their supply chains? And once they know, do they know what to do about it? So this idea of creating awareness and then talking about what behavior do you need to change and how do you change it, and that's when the standards come in. That's when the legislation comes in. When you say, this is what we want you to do. Third bit of, we've told you what to do, are you actually doing it? Or are you greenwashing it and saying, hey, here's a nice sustainability report that nobody believes? That's when audits come in. That's when social audits come in. That's where things like the Together for Sustainability supplier chain capacity building management comes in. There's when Electronics Watch, which is public procurement, and looking at those supply chains. There are initiatives that come in and say, here is how you implement and show us that you're actually doing what you're doing. And just the final wrap up of, okay, we're here, where do we go? And we have the roadmaps. And the roadmaps are really, I know they're extremely long documents, but they're worth looking at. Because the roadmaps say, this is what policymakers need to do, this is what industry needs to do, this is what civil society needs to do. And that need is based on what we heard from people in 3 years. And we heard quite a lot. And there are tensions within that. It's not easy. Money's a problem, political will is a problem, global economics is a problem, global politics is a problem. So to answer that question of systemic change, we know what the symptoms are, but we need to start thinking about solutions, and at the end of it, solutions are about power imbalances and whether we have the political will to address those power imbalances.
Thank you very much.
I can keep talking, but I'll keep quiet now.
I'll ask you something again later. Thank you for this first round. May I invite another panelist? Bryony Claire Hill came from England, far up north, and traveled for a long time to get here. She's representing ICMM, which calls itself a not typical trade association. Its purpose is leadership through collaboration to enhance the contribution of mining and metals to sustainable development. And you are working on responsible mining standards and circular economy. You are working with your member companies on ESG reporting and on the new GRI sector standard for mining and climate change, for example. We heard from Maria before about the issue of the fragmentation of responsible sourcing, especially in the context of more and more emerging standards and certifications that were mentioned. How do you as an industry association address this issue and work towards homogenizing them, while at the same time allowing for the diversity that's probably necessary too?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ursula. And it's is this turned on? Yeah.
Thank
you. It's such an honour to be here. It's my first time in Vienna, so very much enjoying that this conference isn't in Brussels again. Brussels is lovely, but it does seem to have a lot of conferences, so it's really nice to be somewhere different. So I'm with ICMM. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are an industry association for the mining industry, but quite untraditional in that we engage exclusively on sustainable development and on finding those spaces in which collaboration between companies can move the industry forward more than kind of companies acting alone. So currently we have 25 company members, which collectively represent around a third of the global mining industry. And this issue of standards is massive. So we have something called the Mining Principles, which is our membership requirement. So it's a set of 39 specific expectations around performance across environmental, social, governance. And we do a lot of work to make sure that they're up to date and make sure we're moving the dial. We have a third-party verification process associated with that so that kind of performance at the site level is demonstrated. But it's a messy landscape. ICMM, we're only one of the standard setters out there. You've also got the Copper Mark, you've got IRMA, you've got TSM. There's a huge number of different standards, and it's something we are very aware of, that it's complicated, it's inefficient. You've got sites. I visited a site in Australia where they were doing 4 different standards at the same site, and the mine site managers were saying, why are you asking us the same question? We did this last week. And if you sit down and you say, well, this is ICMM, not TSM, they don't care. It's the same question. They're providing the same evidence, and they're having to spend their time doing that instead of actually making improvements based on the findings of that work. It's confusing for downstream customers. They might not know the difference between the standards. They might not know the kind of intricacies of why one might be considered better than the other. And so it's something that we and others have been aware of for a long time, and there's a lot of progress going on in this space. So for a number of years, we've been producing equivalency benchmarks between the different standards, so that if one of our members has already implemented a standard at their site, they can use that to kind of gain credit towards our standard, only where we kind of recognize that standard is equivalent. So they can't just kind of do a lower level standard and tick all the boxes. We need to make sure that it's a robust standard with the right processes in place. But it's still complicated. And so earlier this year, we went out to a big range of stakeholders across the industry, including downstream customers. We spoke to representatives from mining affected communities and indigenous groups, and said to them, what's going on here? What should we do? What do you want to see? And so we are currently in conversation with TSM, represented by the Mining Association of Canada, with the Copper Mark and with the World Gold Council, to understand if there's a potential to consolidate our 4 standards into one standard. It's a really difficult process. We have 4 different standards. They've all emerged for slightly different reasons. Some of them are specific to certain commodities. Some of them are very geographically focused. So there are no promises that this process is going to work, but we're going into it with the hope that we can make it work, and with some really strong principles. So we know that any standard that's going to be accepted is going to need multi-stakeholder governance. We know it's going to need a really robust, really credible assurance system that sits behind it. And so that's the process that we're in at the moment, and there will be more that we can share in due course. But at the moment, we're in the process of working with an industry advisory group and a multi-stakeholder advisory group to look at what this system might need to look like. So there will be more coming out soon, but we're listening. We know that it's a messy landscape. We know there's lots of different standards out there. We don't necessarily see that there needs to be one standard. just having a kind of monopoly of one standard that everyone's doing isn't necessarily desirable, because some competition between them is good. It'll kind of push everybody to keep making improvements. But we do know that the current landscape of the number of standards that are out there isn't necessarily the optimal position for anyone. And so that's what's going on at the moment in the standards landscape. So watch this space.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for this first insight. And now I would like to take a look at another important stakeholder group in this field. I would like to invite Anna Leitner to the podium. She comes from the NGO called Global 2000, which is part of Friends of the Earth in Austria. She was a former ESG corporate rating analyst for some time, that's what I read, and you're now a campaigner for supply chains and resources. The resourcing project showed that responsible sourcing approaches for mineral value chains have been developed for over a decade now, but we still see issues and challenges in the field. Where does civil society see the main implementation challenges for responsible sourcing? And maybe can you say something of how you think we could accelerate the change for those people?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I'm really honored to be here. Also, not as a member of the consortium, it's really important for me to learn from you as experts in the specifics. And I think my role is also here to now broaden the view again a bit, and specifically, what is it really that we demand and that we see as lacking? And I think with Bryony, all the standards that you're working on, all the initiatives that the Commission is working on, it can seem like we are moving. It can seem like the deal is sealed, but I'm really not very happy to announce that it is not. We are seeing immense headwind on the CSDDD that was mentioned so many times as one of the guiding points, and finally a law that will actually create liability, that will actually create change for the people on the ground affected by mining and affected by not responsible mining, affected by companies and sectors that do not act voluntarily. So we have an initiative on the table, but we are seeing massive headwinds on those initiatives that actually would change from a voluntary or just a reporting baseline to really a mandatory law that would make this whole process of due diligence not just an action to be taken so that it can look good, but to be taken to comply with the law, and that globally and across sectors. And so we're really, I'm conflicted seeing the many good steps forward and at the same time looking at this political reality that we're dealing with every day in talks with ministries that are really facing a really big headwind from industry against anything that would make them have to comply and that would make that mandatory. So where I'm seeing in responsible sourcing and any sector in sustainability is now a problem where we are nearing the end of the mandate for the Commission and nearing the next elections, and there is so much to do to take this next step for actually the real systemic change, and it's not looking too bright, yeah, that's just something that we try to affect as NGOs, as civil societies, but I think that's where a lot of the work at universities, but also within companies and standard setters has to come in.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying just a minor group of the actors are changing something compared to the big problem and the big issue? Mm-hmm.
And in general, there's still a high hesitancy for those real obligations.
Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm. Okay. We want to make this a unique event. And I'll tell you something unique. Maybe it's not unique, but it's definitely rare, because I've been moderating many events. We have a purely female podium here. Thank you very much. The German ministry played an important role in the launch of the new OECD Handbook. And the Parliamentary Secretary of State, Bettina Hoffmann, wanted to say something to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, with today's publication on the OECD Handbook, we have reached the destination of an important journey. A decisive moment on this journey happened just over 2 years ago. A team from the Federal Environment Agency, UBA, the Federal Institute for Geosciences and Natural Resources, BGR, and the OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct began the process of drawing up the OECD Handbook. I'm delighted that my ministry launched and financed this project. But the journey itself began much earlier, and we have had the idea for this project in mind for a long time. The importance of the OECD guidelines for the European and international due diligence architecture cannot be overestimated. They give enterprises guidance on practical implementation. In recent years, the number of national and European laws on corporate due diligence that are very closely aligned with the OECD standard has increased significantly. However, environmental aspects in mineral supply chains had not been taken into account to date. We wanted to close this gap. Enterprises along the supply chain from the mine to the finished product need concrete instructions on how to identify, assess, stop, prevent, or cushion environmental impacts in the supply chain. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, Germany is a major industrial hub. The supply chains of German enterprises span the entire globe. German enterprises are largely reliant on imports for the metals, in particular, that are crucial components of so many technologies. This means they have a special responsibility regarding environmental impacts when extracting, processing, and transporting minerals, metals, and their intermediate products. This sense of responsibility also played a crucial role in the development of the German government's new raw materials strategy over the course of 2019. In the end, the German government decided to launch a process under the lead responsibility of the Federal Environment Ministry that comes to an end today. The OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct, with its vast and independent expertise, was a perfect partner. In collaboration with experts from UBA and the BGR, a broad multi-stakeholder expert group, and with the support of many other experts, we were able to achieve this excellent outcome. I would like to warmly thank all the institutions and people that contributed to this major success. It would not have been possible without your commitment and cooperation at all levels. I would especially like to thank Sophia Pinnick and Rashad Abelson from the OECD RBC Center, as well as Gudrun Franken from the BGR and Jan Kosmol from UBA as heads of the expert group. My thanks also go to today's host, the Vienna University of Economics and Business. I'm delighted that so many people that are active in this area are already showing great interest in the new OECD Handbook on environmental due diligence and mineral supply chains. We are counting on you all to continue your work with partners and across borders to protect the environment. I hope that the handbook will be a valuable tool for you. Thank you.
As a physical speaker, I would like to ask Luis Marechal to come to the podium. to actually have the official launch of the Handbook on Environmental Due Diligence in Mineral Supply Chains. He's policy advisor at the OECD Responsible Business Conduct Unit, and is going to show his own slides. You are.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me okay. Yeah.
A little bit
Thanks.
closer.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's obviously a very important moment for our team here, because it's been a lot of work, as was explained. It's been a long process involving a number of different views and stakeholders. So it's really exciting for us to be here, also in the context of this resourcing initiative that we've been involved in at different stages. So indeed, I'm a senior advisor in the Center for Responsible Business Conduct. I've been primarily working on the implementation of responsible business conduct standards in mineral supply chains, and great joy for me to be here today to introduce this new document. I wasn't able to bring that many printed copies, apologies for that, but it's already available online, so you can access it quite easily, and you'll find the link at the end of my presentation. I didn't want to have a very long presentation going into the numerous details of the document. I just wanted to introduce broadly the document and some of the main overarching principles, and the way it's supposed to be articulated with other RBC instruments that the OECD has developed. That's actually a very important aspect, because it's an issue that we've had in the past with sort of the well-known OECD due diligence guidance for responsible supply chain of minerals, which you will see in a second here. The overarching instrument of our center is actually the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, which, as some of you may know, was also recently updated, including on environmental considerations. And in 2010, we adopted the second document that you see here, focusing on conflict-affected and high-risk areas, and focusing on a specific set of risks, namely human rights violation, conflict finance, and serious economic crimes. And for a long time, we were asked that question: why don't you consider that environmental risks actually matter? Our response was always to say, this guidance is an instrument to help companies prioritize risk assessment, not excluding other types of risks, obviously. So it's very important for us now to be able to also point to that document, which makes that point even clearer. Companies should be doing due diligence on all sorts of risks, starting with the ones that they think may be the most important in their supply chains. So you do have now a set of existing instruments that are available. The one on the top is actually due diligence recommendations, but it's sector agnostic, so it provides general recommendations on how to perform due diligence on chapters of the M&E guidelines. But the added value of this work, for sure, is that it's been tailored to the unique characteristics of mineral supply chains. It's really important to understand that it's not new guidance. It seems a bit technical, but those instruments that you can see here were adopted at council level at the OECD. It's not the case of the handbook. The handbook is really here to provide additional clarifications and elements of understanding to help companies scope out their due diligence exercise, focusing on environmental risks and supply chains of mineral resources. Some key considerations there. The first one is absolutely central. Due diligence should always be risk-based. That's one of the overarching principles of due diligence under the OECD guidance. You don't devote the same kind of efforts to every type of risk that you may have mapped. It's really important that as a company you make the effort to focus on the ones that are the most salient, those that might have the biggest impacts. The scope, it covers all minerals and metals. Important clarification, that there has been some confusion in the past, but I wanted to clarify that. It's all geographies as well, contrary to the minerals guidance that focuses on conflict-affected and high-risk areas. This one is really applicable to all geographies, so wherever the mining product may come from. It's for use by all companies in mineral supply chains, from miner to refiner to manufacturer. but looking at risks of impact primarily in the upstream and midstream segments, so including refining and smelting stages, which is also slightly different to the OECD minerals guidance adopted in 2010. And as with a lot of the work that we generally do, there's a specific emphasis on artisanal and small-scale miners. The point was made earlier on in one of the breakout groups. The OECD RBC instruments have always been extremely wary of potential unintended consequences on artisanal miners of international standards on responsible sourcing. So you'll find language again here in that document inviting and encouraging companies to actively engage with artisanal and small-scale miners rather than what we call de-risking. What we call de-risking in our jargon is companies identifying a risk and opting out of the supply chain, contrary to taking a mitigation approach, which is absolutely front and center of everything that we want to do in our work. Just recalling that our interest is really to make sure that the right type of investments are channeled to producing countries. So it's about supporting responsible investments, and that's the added value of the recommendations that we develop together with our partners and stakeholders. The types of risks that you'll find, I mean, you have a chance to take a look at the document, but just to give you some key examples on the nature of risks. It will focus on climate change, on biodiversity loss and degradation, air, water and soil pollution, mismanagement of wastes, noise and vibration, damage to cultural heritage sites, and water depletion. So these are, amongst others, the kind of risk that this guidance calls companies to pay specific attention to. Just an overall look at the structure of the handbook. This slide is actually slightly outdated. Apologies for that. The structure has changed a bit, but it's the main principles lie. I mean, what's really important there is always the 6-step approach of the OECD framework. For those of you that are extremely familiar with the OECD guidance on supply chains coming out of conflict-affected and high-risk areas, you might be slightly confused. There's only 5 steps in the 2010 guidance, and here you'll find 6. It's to really align with the rest of the RBC instruments that have been adopted since then. So yeah, it's about understanding environmental risks and impacts, understanding the various steps that companies are invited to go into to really map risks and consider corrective action plans, track implementation and results. And another key point that we've constantly battling on, the importance of reporting and public disclosure. This entire process is built on good faith engagement from companies, but good faith engagement can only be trusted if there is meaningful disclosure and publication by companies. And speaking frankly, we're still quite behind on that, so that's a key point. You'll find also a glossary. Some of the annexes have actually been taken out just to make it a more concise document and make sure that it's practical and implementable. Yeah, that's about it as it goes for the structure. As I said, I didn't want to give a full lecture of every single 60 pages of the documents. It's available online. You can access it through the 3rd link here, and we're now very much excited about the prospect of putting this into motion and working on actual implementation with companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I ask you to sit down for this last round, for this last wrap-up of today's conference, where we can harvest what you can take home, what you get out of it. A last wrap-up. We will not do it too long, but have a look at what has happened today and what you come out with from the different sessions that you worked on. For this last round, I'm happy to invite a few people again to come here and have a talk with you together about what you want to take back home. May I ask Luciana Rendes, did I say it right? Almost. Can you help me, please? Oh my God, what a mistake. Rendace. Okay. Where are you from?
I'm from Italy.
You're from Italy, okay, of course.
No worries.
Is it on? No, it's not.
One?
Yeah, it's like
yes.
this, it's on. Yeah. And you are from CSI Europe. I think everybody knows that. Around 10,000 enterprises as partners. And you, in particular, work for Drive Sustainability. Would you like to explain that quickly, what that is?
Yes, Drive Sustainability is a partnership of 16 automotive companies working on different aspects of supply chain sustainability. Of course, we work a lot on compliance. We developed a self-assessment questionnaire that is used by the 16 automotive companies on Tier 1 and Tier 2 suppliers. We have developed several common requirements on all aspects related to sustainability, and we also work a lot on raw materials and responsible sourcing of minerals.
Okay. Great to have you here for this final panel.
Thank you for
And then
the
I would like to
invitation.
bring up some people we already know. May I ask again Bryony, Masuma and Luis to come up here and have a wrap up together. Right. So you were in these parallel sessions where you talked about the issues that are here on these wallpapers there. May I ask just who was actually facilitating and who was supporting these sessions? May I ask those people to stand up quickly and just make yourself visible once again?
Johannes,
Those were the people who supported it. Thank you very much.
Emanuele, Sheherzad, Liesel.
Thank you so much. And what we said that we would want to do is that you said together after the workshop, so actually you worked even more than only during the sessions. You sat together and you summarized, you put together your outcomings of those sessions and had a quick analysis actually of what happened in the different sessions. And you decided together that you would come up with a couple of questions that you will ask the panel here and also the audience. And Masuma, who's the one representing those facilitators right now, she will come in with the questions. And please, go ahead.
So thank you very much to my fellow facilitators and consortium partners for all chickening out and making me do this. So the one thing everybody who came back from the workshop went, that was a good discussion. And I think that's great. I think having 4 workshops where people had great conversations, and there was a small part of me going, thank God this is the final month and we don't need to incorporate all of this in the results, which is also good because that means there's a lot more to do and a lot more to think about in terms of implementation. Right, so here are the 4 questions that we found common across all workshops. The first thing was we noticed that there is a similarity in almost all of these notice boards that you're seeing there. Remember, pink was for highest priority, and green/yellow, depending on what color you're seeing, was for where can you support or which part of you can add to this capacity. And what we noticed was a slight discrepancy. The things that were the highest recommendation were not the same areas where most people could support those areas. Now, we understand this could be because of the way who's participating, who's not, but we thought it was an interesting idea of saying, here's a priority, but do we have the capacity? Do we have the capacity to get this done? And I wanted to ask the rest of the panelists if they sort of see that between saying this should be done and the actual capacity to get it done.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm gonna try to answer this question. So in my group, it was kind of mixed. We had some industry representatives and policymakers, and a lot of expectations were made towards policymakers indeed. What I feel is that maybe not every actor is aware of the role that can play in, for example, the enforcement of regulations. I think that all these different recommendations that you developed in the roadmap, it is true that it's very useful to see them divided in silos, but at the same time we should not forget how intertwined they are and how, for example, I don't know, I'm taking the example of industry. Once the regulation enter into force, industry has a huge role to play that goes beyond compliance, but It's a lot about engagement and dialogue along the supply chain, but also when it comes to civil society and scrutiny, industry has also a great role to play in terms of transparency.
Any?
Yeah, so I think, as you alluded to, I do think it is partly who's in the room. So a lot of actions were being given to policy and also to upstream industry, and there just aren't that many people here. And actually, those of us that are here tended to migrate towards certain of the workshops, I think, because they're particularly hot topics. So I think that's partly it, but I also don't think this is unique to this session. I think it's probably quite common that everyone wants everyone else to do something. So I think the way we need to look at it as well, certainly when I look at this, they're so interconnected. I was in the renewables session. We're doing a lot of work at the moment at ICMM on circular economy, and we're kind of breaking that down into a couple of different but very much interconnected stages. So we look at what we call process circularity, which is all the stuff we can do through the mining process, applying circular principles. So reducing tailings, valorizing waste, all these sorts of things. And then we look at product circularity, which is about making sure that materials are staying in use, making sure we're working with downstream around kind of design and all these different things. And one of the things we found is that it kind of needs everyone to work together. So if you want to recycle metals, you need a policy environment, which means that you can transport scrap metals between different places. You need labeling of that scrap so people know what's in there, so that when it gets to a smelter, the content of it's known. And so I think it does also partly reflect the fact that, look, yeah, we can do this bit, but we're only going to be successful if there's a policy environment that allows it. Or we can put the policy in place, but it's only going to have an impact if the industry then gets on board with this different business model. So I think that's also part of it, just that it is so interconnected with these big kind of entire value chain issues. So yeah, that would be my take.
Anything you would like to say?
Yeah, not much to add, actually. I think it's also due to the representation today. Sometimes also perhaps due to the fact that some of those challenges seem a bit overwhelming, and you don't necessarily know how you can contribute. And in this kind of instances, it's useful to get an external perspective to help people understand how they can actually do something about it. So I think that may be part of the explanation as well.
All right. The second question that was again part of all four groups was around power, and I'm glad that question came up. It sort of transpired. The statement is thinking of the entire supply chain. Where is the greatest power to affect change when it comes to responsible sourcing? Because we seem to have a lot of expectations of mining companies, but do we also acknowledge that mining companies are not always the most powerful group within a supply chain? So what about other actors? Do other actors have more power to affect change?
Well, I think that I work with 16 automotive companies, and in Drive we do believe that the downstream has a huge role to play, both in cascading down requirements, but also in engaging and providing capacity building to the different actors in the supply chain. It's important, I think, to understand there, it's also that it's not just about an individual company, but it's also about exercising leverage by collaborative action with other companies, but also with other industry. I think in particular when it comes to responsible sourcing and battery materials, I think there's an alliance with the downstream part of the supply chain of the automotive industry, but also the electronics and the renewable energy would be most beneficial for the whole supply chain, and not only for compliance with these new regulations that directly affect the downstream more than the upstream, but most of all to create actual impacts on the ground in producing countries, and to show that also the mining industry has a huge potential for positive impact on local development.
So I think there is a lot that the mining industry can do, But I think it's important to recognize the diversity within the mining industry. And some of the discussion is, oh, well, the sustainability teams in the mining companies need to do X, Y, Z. That's fine for the really big companies. But there's a huge diversity within mining. And there's obviously a lot of discussion around artisanal and small-scale mining. And that's a completely different conversation. Because it's, even within ASM, it's so varied. There is completely legal, completely safe ASM. And there is illegal, very dangerous ASM. There's a huge spectrum within ASM. Then you've got a massive number of kind of companies that are in the middle, which are bigger mines, but it might be companies that are operating 1 or 2 mines. They might have somebody responsible for sustainability, but that's covering everything from human rights, environment, the whole lot. It might be that somebody is doing sustainability as part of their job within that company. And then you've got the kind of large-scale mining companies, the likes that I work with at ICMM. So I think it's sometimes we talk about the mining industry as though every company has the same resources as the BHPs or the Rio Tintos, where they do have somebody responsible for water and somebody responsible for nature, and every site will have teams of people, and that's just not the case. So the capacity of companies will partly depend upon how big the company is, how long they've been operating, where their assets are. So yeah, just a bit of nuance to add when we talk about the mining industry, that we need to acknowledge the vast range of capacity that exists within that industry.
Yeah, no, for us it's always been clear that it has to be a shared effort. Of course, the mines themselves are closer to the actual potential impacts of their operations. So they're, in sort of a practical way, they have the most ability to implement a solution for change. So, but it has to be a shared responsibility. It has to be signal coming from the buyer, signal coming from the financiers, signal coming from governments as well. Governments have a lot of responsibility also in terms of, and that's something that's slowly disappearing from the conversation, building the capacity of administrations in producing countries. There's a lot of pressure on ESG metrics, and progressively we're losing sight of the capacity of receiving governments to manage that as well. You have to have both. So again, everyone thinks of the mining industry because they are there, basically. But everything that's been just said is very true. I mean, it's not just large mining companies. It's not just large mining companies from jurisdictions that care about responsible sourcing as well. So it's much more diverse than that, and it truly needs to be a shared effort.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
From the resourcing project, let me just quickly add, one of the groups that we didn't have enough time to look at was the investor community. So that's the BlackRocks of the world. And we did a couple of panels on that. It's an area that needs to be further explored because they definitely have a lot of power, which was shown by the whole global tailings dam standards. It was driven by the Church of England and the Swedish Pension Fund, and then ICMM and a lot of other people, and it just showed you the power of money, which is now being acknowledged, but the power of money is also struggling with how do you define responsible sourcing, how do you define sustainability, so the same side of cancer. There are a number of powerful actors, but kind of reflecting what these guys have said, we need to stop doing this as a silo thing. It has to be a collective, what can you bring to the table and what can you bring to the table, and that's how we push forward on moving things together.
May I add one final question, a very quick one, maybe, an easy one, I don't know, but a quick one. If the resourcing project was to continue as a multi-stakeholder platform for responsible sourcing, and you had one wish, what would be the most important next step to further advance the adoption of responsible sourcing? Can you think of anything? Would you start, Brownie?
I mean, today has been absolutely fantastic, but it would be so amazing to do an event like this in South America or South Africa, and have people who are working in mine sites, mining-affected communities as part of the conversation. I think these boards would look very different.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
I think you mentioned it, but looking more at the finance side of things is much needed, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And maybe also, as we referring to the last question you mentioned, I think a lot of work needs to be, would be really interesting to see how this recommendation would work into practice and to engage with the industry on, in particular for their implementation.
I ain't
Okay.
saying nothing.
Sorry?
I'm not saying anything.
And you're not saying anything, you're just wishing. You're not saying anything. Shall we leave it here for now, for this discussion? And thank you very much. Please stay with us. Continue. We continue a little bit further. Thank you. And now, as the project coordinator, Alexander needs to say something. At the end of the project, at the end of the conference day, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ushi. I hope you can all hear me. Yeah, so I hope you can bear just a couple of minutes with me. I guess we are all tired and hungry already, and especially also Masuma mentioned already the alcohol. Still, I think since this is the final conference of the resourcing project, I think a few more words on the project as such. So not just the content, but more the collaboration, etc. And also, of course, a few words of thank you, I think, are important at this stage. So for those who don't know me, my name is Alex. I am the project coordinator of the resourcing project. So basically, I am responsible, or I was responsible, for the day-to-day management, well, meaning trying to make everyone happy in the consortium and trying to make everyone deliver what they have to deliver, when they have to deliver it. So yeah, whatever complaints you may have about the project, well, here I am. This is your chance. Yeah, I came into the project after a few months when it started, so roughly 4 years ago, and at that time I was actually quite new to the field as such. So first of all, thank you to André, the head of our institute, who is not here anymore, but also to the WU team as such for taking me in, as well as also thank you to, of course, the entire consortium to accept me in this way. And yeah, if you ask me what was the biggest challenge throughout these 4 years, other than, well, giving the closing remarks at the final conference of a 4-year project when everyone is hungry and tired, it's, well, probably, yeah, it's 4 years is a long time, and 12 partners are a lot of partners. And keeping the momentum throughout the whole time, motivating everyone really to, well, deliver, as I just said, and collaborate was definitely, I guess, the biggest challenge. However, as a great consortium, I think we managed quite well, actually, and yeah, this is actually thanks to everyone in the consortium that they managed to stay motivated and engaged until the end, and to contribute and deliver as part of a team. And for that, I would like to say thank you very much to everyone, and I think we can give an applause. Yeah, applause. What about success? What about, well, are we making a difference? Because this was a question also we discussed yesterday about the project, and well, especially for CSA, so actually it's not communication, it's coordination and support action. I was thinking that the C is wrong. So coordination and support action, it's utterly hard, well, to estimate or to measure real impact or success in that way. And of course I could do now some number dropping, like how many thousand views, website views we had, how many thousand of views of video content, etc. And then we can have a debate how representative these numbers or meaningful they actually are. I think what I would like to do here is just giving you a few examples, more on an anecdotal level, that at least for me personally are, and I'm very careful now in the wording, are indicative in a sense maybe that the resourcing project has been a success. One is definitely that I'm really surprised how many people actually know the resourcing project. Wherever I go, and especially during the last year, when the lockdowns came down and we started to travel again, wherever I go, actually, and I'm mentioning I'm from resourcing, the resourcing project. It's really, really interesting one. You're having your closing conference next week. Oh, wow, you know that? It's really, I'm surprised, and not just in Europe. Just last week I was talking to a big, well-known Chilean mining company, and they were aware of us. They were aware of the project. They were aware of the content. And in that sense, I think we managed actually to get some, acknowledgement and recognition as a forum for responsible sourcing. Not just that, we also receive frequently the feedback that the content as such is actually quite useful and being used in their work with clients, in their work research, etc. Another point or another example is the collaboration or actually a few occasions where we have been asked to support different efforts. For example, one time the Japanese National Oil, Gas and Metal Corporation approached us whether we could help them in a study on best practice, responsible sourcing and sustainability. And we mediated meetings with the European Commission and a few other companies actually. Again, I was surprised actually how many actors and what type of actors actually approach us and ask us for support and where we could make a contribution in that sense. Maybe small, but still meaningful. The same also actually with today's OECD session, the launch of the Handbook. I can only congratulate and thank the OECD and everyone involved actually to take responsible sourcing serious and to use this platform actually to launch and show the world the Handbook finally. So yeah, thanks for that also. And last but not least, actually my personal favorite, a very well-known expert, unfortunately I cannot say any names here now, but a very well-known expert, and I'm sure most of you know her, that's what I can say, her, and the organization she's leading. She just told me a few weeks ago that she's actually listening to our YouTube channel quite frequently in the morning while going to runs. That's success. And I can only invite everyone to do the same. It's also healthy, I think. With that in mind, success, maybe just one or two words also to wrap up what has been said during this final conference here. Where would I wish or where would I hope that the future of responsible sourcing is going, and where would I hope that the resourcing project as such also made at least some contribution? And it has been said that, we are definitely moving, or over the last 4 years since the project started, responsible sourcing has definitely gained a lot of traction. There's definitely a lot of movement in good directions. Again, hopefully with some contribution of the resourcing project, but definitely also due to a lot of, regulatory push from the EC and others, that then actually make responsible sourcing a must-have and not just a nice-to-have, which I think is utterly important, but also then establish something like a level playing field that was mentioned several times already, meaning that in the end, actors in the supply chain can pursue responsible sourcing without playing the winners and losers game, and I think this is very, very important. What I still hope in this regard is that this regulatory push will not lead to a kind of mere compliance mindset. I think this is also something that we discussed a lot in the project and was also discussed today. Compliance, yes, of course. I mean, regulations are there to comply with, but still compliance in the sense that it is a means to an end and not an end in itself. The end in itself and the goal ultimately being, change, better livelihoods, less environmental degradation, etc. And the resourcing project produced a lot of content that will give you more advice and guidance what that means in detail. Just two aspects I would like to very quickly emphasize in this regard. And one is, it's about responsible sourcing, so responsibility is a main thing. And responsibility remains and has to remain with the individual company or with the individual actor, not just companies actually. You cannot push it or delegate it elsewhere, may it be, to suppliers, may it be to standards and certifications. No. You have to take responsibility for the sustainability in your own operations, and you have to take responsibility for understanding your impact, good, bad, direct, indirect, in the supply chain, and also the leverage you have in order to make a change in the supply chain. The second one is improvement. So compliance not in the sense of, here are the requirements, now please, comply with them and then we are willing to engage. No, it should be the other way around. Engage in order to help and work together, collaborate to meet these requirements, and that's improvements. Otherwise it will not work. Yeah, with these two messages in mind from my side, maybe just very quickly, the entire consortium, could you stand up one last time, please? Everyone who was involved, all partners. So these are the people who over the last 4 years produced everything. I think a big thank you. We also prepared some chocolates for you. I'll make sure they get to you. Second thing, I think also, especially for today, a special thanks to the main actors of this conference. And, well, Uschi, please. Where is she? Mariana, come here. Angelo, please come. Angelo, please come here. Yeah, these are the three main people who made it happen today. Thanks a lot.
There is not much else to say except for thank you for being here. It was a pleasure.